m'appelle Claude.
Je t'appelle blue.
No!
I've met a surprising number of people who have learned a language just by watching TV, and the 90s sitcom Friends comes up most often for people who have learned English. As someone who's never watched a full episode of the show but loves the concept of using engaging TV and content to learn a language, I analyzed the dialogue across 234 episodes of all 10 seasons of Friends to understand how and why the show is so powerful as a tool for learning a language. Since Friends mirrors other available shows in a language that you may be learning, I looked at 3 key areas. First, what happens if you try watching a show without knowing a word in the language? Second, what if you already tried watching and you have a little bit of background either through a course, from self-study, or through apps? And third, how can you use subtitles to learn? As we'll get into, the big takeaway here is that the show Friends is not unique in how powerful it can be, and there are important, generalizable lessons for how you can use TV for the language that you're trying to learn. For those who haven't heard of Friends, according to Wikipedia, it's a sitcom based around the lives of 6 friends in their 20s living in New York City in the 1990s. So you'll hear a lot of conversation, see dating interactions, work struggles, all packaged in a mildly funny and allegedly charming show where you get to see people coming of age as adults. So many people have watched this show in its entirety because you come to care about the characters as you watch and almost feel like you're hanging out with this group of friends. It's also mostly clean humor and a pretty wholesome show overall, which increases the viewer base as well. But let's quantify. Each episode is about 22 minutes long, which means that each season lasts about 9 hours, and if you watch the entire show, that's 90 hours of time spent in your target language. Each episode has about 3,000 spoken words, which boils down to around 650 unique core words. Aggregate that up across all 10 seasons and you've heard around 700,000 total words made up of around 14,000 unique words. That's as many words as a solid book series and is somewhere between The Lord of the Rings and the Harry Potter series. And for context, a native speaker knows somewhere between 10 and 30,000 root words in their language. Again, as we jump into this data for Friends, it's important to remember that there's undoubtedly a similar character-based sitcom in your target language, so all of these results are generalizable. Here are a number of shows that I've compiled for popular languages, but please leave a comment below with a show that you've enjoyed in your target language. So, what would your learning curve look like as you watch season after season? As we covered in the last video, obviously you don't know a word just by seeing it once. To recap, 20 exposures to a word is a good conservative estimate of how long it takes to acquire a word based on peer-reviewed research. So here's how your vocabulary would be expected to grow as you watch Rachel, Ross, Phoebe, Chandler, Joey, and Monica in Central Perk. 1,800 words in your vocabulary after 10 seasons, which is approaching a serious B1. The shape of that curve is also remarkably similar to what we saw when you read Harry Potter or when you watch YouTube videos. That fact should not be surprising because this curve follows the general distribution of words in a language, called Zipf's law in the world of quantitative linguistics. That being said, in a future video we will get into an in-depth look at reading versus watching because boy oh boy is there a lot to learn. Assuming you watch 1 episode of Friends per day, you'd acquire those 1,800 words in about 7.5 months. This is a good baseline, but with streaming and high-quality content and phone addictions, you're probably going to binge a show in one way or another. Once you really enjoy the story and the characters, let's see what's possible if you increase the pace or re-watch episodes. Like the one where they have triplets or they kiss to see if they were really on a break. I don't know. Anyway, watch 3 episodes a day and you'll learn all of those words in just 2.5 months. Watch 3 episodes a day and then re-watch the entire series, your vocabulary will be up at 2,800 words. How's that for an unsurprising finding? The more time you spend per day with your target language, the faster you will learn. But at least now you have some data to back up your TV habits to your spouse and your parents. Let's take a different angle on this to see how you can use TV as one tool in your arsenal as you're learning a language. Chances are that if you're even thinking about watching TV in another language, you've probably already spent some time in that language. Maybe you know 500 words from a few months on Duolingo, or 1,000 words from a couple semesters at school, or an A2 course. Here's what watching a TV show in your target language would look like with that in mind if you already knew the 500 or 1,000 most common words in your target language. Cool. Let's call out a few of the interesting features of these paths. That foundation that you've laid ahead of time undoubtedly helps, but you do make up the difference the more of the show that you watch. This ties back to the fact that most language learning materials, especially for beginners, are covering the same base of words and topics. And that's true whether you're learning in a classroom setting, using apps, or just absorbing the language through content. you'll learn to be and to go very quickly and very early on, regardless of what path you take. Another interesting feature is that all three of these lines are increasing the entire way, meaning that no matter what base you started with, your vocabulary will continue to grow as you keep watching TV. So if watching TV is a compelling reason for you to spend time with your target language, even if you don't know anything right now, go pop some popcorn and spend time with the language that you're trying to learn by watching TV. But if you think that some background will make you more committed to your target language, learn a bit first, pick up that textbook, and then go start watching. And the third interesting feature is that looking at the beginning of the curves, if you already know some material, it's flatter, almost as if it's the opposite of that steeper curve if you don't know anything. The explanation here is that you already know the common words that show up a lot, and it takes more time for the less frequent words to show up the 20 times you need to acquire them, which you can see starts to happen towards the beginning of the second season. For example, the words warm and convince are synonyms for more common words. But since they're used less often, you only learn them in later seasons as you watch more of the show. While Friends' 200 episodes across 10 seasons is quite a lot, and it's rare to find a TV show that's that long and engaging, switching between shows will follow the same curve as you finish one TV show and move on to the next. There's a big question in the language learning community and academia when it comes to subtitles, if you should be using them in the language that you already understand or the language that you're trying to learn. In reality, there's even an interesting discussion by Vox about whether or not you should be using subtitles in your own native language, given how hard it can be to understand dialogue the way that things are filmed nowadays. If you know that you'll stick with your language learning, find a way to include subtitles in your target language to improve comprehension and listening skills. If you're more advanced or ready for a challenge, use only target language subtitles. But if you're just starting out or not ready yet, think about using dual language subtitles. In my case, that would be English and German. Since most platforms and content don't support this natively, I'd recommend using a browser extension like Language Reactor. This is not an ad, there is a free tier, and when you pair the subtitles with other features like one-click lookups and exports, these features are quite useful. Obviously, you will not have subtitles in the real world, so I would recommend watching sometimes without subtitles, and then also, of course, conversing with other people, listening to podcasts, etc., because subtitles can also be a crutch. Based on research, it is totally a viable option for you to watch with subtitles in your native language as you're watching shows in another language. However, I would advise against it for two reasons. The first is that your native language can be a crutch. If you just end up watching the show but using your native language as the portal to the show instead of your target language, you're doing yourself a disservice and wasting precious language learning time even if you're still enjoying the show. And number two, a big shift when learning another language is identifying yourself with your target language and as someone who can engage meaningfully with it. Think forward to 6 months from now when you finish watching a TV show in your target language. Would you feel more proud of your accomplishment if you would watch the show with subtitles in your native language versus the language that the show is actually in? That's not a rhetorical question. Find what works for you and what makes you humbly proud to grow while learning. And there you have it. Beyond the countless stories of people using content to open up a new corner of the world to them, now we have data that shows that TV, just like reading, can really help you make progress in another language. So sit back, relax, and learn.